At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Ranked #1 in innovation for 10 consecutive years and #2 among public universities for employability, ASU isn't just ahead of the curve, it's creating new paths to success. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online, that's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abu-Al-Samad.
So we took a week off because it was really busy, and this week is no less busy, so we figured we'd just do a podcast. Yeah, because what's better than that? And there's a lot of stuff for us to talk about. First, we're probably going to start with Frankfurt, but before we get there, we need to talk about cars, because we've been driving some. And Sam, you have a car that I stare at every time I see one because it's beautiful, and by all accounts, it's a fantastic driver's car, which is quite a change from Lexus. So you've got the LC500. Tell us more.
That's right. I was actually last week I was driving the LC500, and we'll get into this week's car next week. But the LC500 is, it's, I think, probably the best looking car that Lexus has ever built. It's a stunning coupe. It's got, it kind of, in some ways, when I first saw it, I thought of it as kind of a throwback to the original first generation SC of the early 90s.
Yeah, which is not a bad thing in its own right.
Right. Yeah, and then combined with elements of the LFA, which was obviously short-lived. No, they only built 500 of them. So the LC takes elements of the LFA, especially in its proportions and some of the details. Things like the vents in front of the rear wheels, the rocker panel vents. But it puts everything together in just a really beautiful way. It's got fantastic proportions. And the thing about this car is, as a luxury coupe, it's as a modern luxury coupe, it's on the heavy side. It's like 4,200 pounds. So it's not really a sports car, but it really is a grand touring coupe in the classic style. Kind of what you would think of like a Ferrari Daytona, that sort of thing. Is a classic grand touring coupe. It's not as hardcore as an LFA, but it's got some really impressive performance. The one I drove was the standard LC500, which has an updated version of the 5-liter V8 that you find in the ISF and the RCF and the GSF. 471 horsepower, 398 foot-pounds of torque, I think. So it's a few more horsepower and foot-pounds than the others, but now with a 10-speed automatic transmission, which you can control it with the metal paddles on the back of the steering wheel, or tap the shift lever. The transmission's very responsive. When you tap the paddles, it goes right away. And the part of why I call it a grand touring coupe as opposed to a sports car is when you're just cruising around, if you're taking a road trip or whatever, it's got the classic Lexus Serenity, nice and quiet, but throw it into sport mode and step on it, and it's just got a marvelous roar. Not the sort of rumble you get from a big American V8 typically, but more of a European style, high performance V8 sound, and it's a really wonderful car to drive. Very responsive. Never harsh, even on the very low profile tires that were on this thing. It always stayed comfortable to ride in, even over the worst roads. As a grand touring coupe, is something that you might want to take for a road trip. One downside is the trunk is very small. It's like 5.5 cubic feet and very shallow. You could get a couple of carry-on bags in there as long as they're not overstuffed. But you can actually use the back seat, for more stuff, for you and your partner if you want to, because you're certainly not going to put any actual human beings back.
Yeah,
there, at least not anybody that you like.
Right. It's got a Hollywood trunk, small and shallow, just like all the people there. I mean, it's. But the idea that grand touring is like a pejorative term too. Like let's just spell that anyway.
Oh, absolutely not.
Grand touring, right? Grand touring Ferraris are the best Ferraris. A, because they're front engined, but also B, because they're the ones that you can live with. And I think that's the same thing here. Like it's a very livable car. It's beautiful. It's definitely quick, but it's not tiresome in that sense. Like,
it's not a car you want to take to a track day, but it's a car that you want to take, for say a road trip through the mountains of Virginia.
Right. And if you took it to a track day, it wouldn't necessarily embarrass itself either.
No,
so like that's
not the ideal mount for something like that.
So the one thing that's been consistent throughout Lexus's history, or at least one of the things that's been consistent, is that their suspension tuning has been knocked as floaty. Now, I haven't had that criticism of the last few sort of serious Lexus cars I drove. The IS and the GS certainly didn't seem terribly floaty like those original LS models did. It seems like from what you're saying, they've got this actually nailed down. They've figured out how to make it ride and handle like an actual, high-end GT.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And in fact, most of the recent Lexuses I've driven, especially like the F Sport models, have had a really well controlled suspension, good body control, good wheel control. They did not have any of that floatiness of old school LSs of the early 90s.
Yeah.
You still have that level of refinement. I don't know if you remember some of those early Lexus commercials.
Yes.
Have a stack of champagne glasses, stacked
right
up on the engine while it was running. And you still have that smoothness and refinement. One of the things, in this car, even though it's a fairly large displacement V8, you never feel any of that characteristic wobbling that you get with a typical American V8, that wobble that feels like a heartbeat. You never have any of that. Idle, this thing is absolutely smooth. It's almost, even though it's not shutting off the engine, it feels like it. There's no indication that anything's happening, until you step on it and then it just goes.
Yeah, well, and I think the Lexus had that I remember the most is the one where they have the car on like this giant gimbal and they roll a ball bearing around the body seams, which it's this is marketing nonsense in the most like 90s sense, but it's funny. Lexus actually compares the handling of the LC500 to the Aston Martin DB11, and so given your expert opinion, how do you think it matches up to the DB11? I'm kidding. I'm sure.
I haven't driven an Aston, so I
think that's something Aston Martin needs to rectify. They need to get you a DB11 so you can compare.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I just that's again we haven't given up the marketing hyperbole because. That just strikes me as being a little bit ridiculous. At 92,000, it's not like the LC500 is cheap, but it's also not. It's not as expensive as that once seemed.
Half the price of a DB11.
Yeah, well, and 92K. Well, it doesn't buy as much car as it used to, but it sure buys a lot of two-door GT. How does this car measure up?
I'd say, if I was in the market for a high performance luxury GT, I would certainly give this, if I was cross shopping it against an Aston, I don't know that I would necessarily choose it over the Aston, but it would certainly be worthy of consideration. There's something about a British GT with a big V12 engine, that is always going to be, have an advantage, but it's nice. It doesn't feel, like for example, in an Aston, you've got, different kinds of woods and leather trim than what you get in this. This definitely feels in a lot of respects, more Lexus, more Japanese. But that's not to denigrate it in any way. I think it's a fantastic car.
Yeah, and does it have and tune or whatever Lexus calls it? They're like terrible infotainment, or is that better too?
Yes. No, it's still pretty awful.
That's too bad.
It's Lexus N-Form, I think.
N-Form, right?
Toyota's N-Tune and Lexus's N-Form.
And so I screwed that up all the time.
The one other complaint that I have about this is for the control interface for the infotainment is the touchpad that they've been using on a bunch of their cars recently.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And, it still has the haptic feedback system in there. I mean, they've had, prior to the touchpad, they used this little stubby joystick thing that was sort of a combination of a joystick and a mouse, and it had a haptic feedback built in, when you got to what would be the touch targets if it had a touch screen, it kind of clicks into place, and so you can kind of do it by feel. And they've tried to replicate that in the touchpad, but it just doesn't work as well in the touchpad. I wish they'd go back to the previous setup. I think that worked better.
So I liked that previous, like the little joystick thingy, but I also felt like it has this sense of disconnection. And I always like struggled with it. Like I want it to go faster. No, now it's going too fast. It just, I don't know. Nobody's going to come up with a perfect interface.
Yeah, there is some non-linearity to it. I still think the rotary controllers like iDrive and Audi MMI, especially the latest generation MMI, I think are still better than any of these. Yeah,
well, and MMI was fantastic the last time I drove an Audi. And it's funny, speaking with a colleague who's not really super into cars, but she got a newer Audi when hers was in the shop. It also had the little MMI thing with the like finger, the handwriting recognition stuff, and it was interesting to see how her experience measured up from as just like a pure consumer. And it was funny. It was sort of like the same reaction I had. It was like, oh yeah, the handwriting recognition, it's actually good. Look at that. It recognizes my words, and it's really easy to get into, and just the amount of ways you can provide input to those systems, that and BMW is the same way, and Command is also the same way. There's a few different ways to get what you want into and out of those systems. The Lexus and Toyota systems are a lot more limited, and they're a little bit more frustrating to use. They're kind of dumber. They're slower.
The Germans have moved towards, and also Infiniti as well, have all moved towards multimodal setups where, in most cases you have a touchscreen available, and you have the rotary control knob, and you have the touch interface for entering letters and numbers. So you've got multiple different ways to interface with it, depending on whatever your personal preference is.
Yeah. And the more I use them, my personal preference continues to just tilt toward like none of this stuff. I just want nothing.
Just give me a rotary volume dial.
Yeah. Give me a knob. Give me two knobs for one for volume, one for tuning, a couple more for the heating system, and we're good to go. Especially now that there's more and more evidence. Was it NHTSA or IHS or something last week? Somebody published some sort of report that said like distracted driving is a problem, and the technology in cars is causing it. It's like, yeah, no kidding. You need to do a study for that. Come on. I know it makes me sound like I've got like a lawn I'm trying to protect, but
I mean, it's a very valid argument, because at least up until the time when we can just shut off and let the car do the driving, we're still responsible for controlling that car, and if you have to put excessive cognitive effort into changing the station you want to listen to, or just changing the volume. That's not a good thing. I mean, you those are things that you should be able to do without even really thinking about it.
Yeah.
They should be trivial things that, you just tap on a button, twist a knob, whatever, to turn the volume up or down, change the station, or whatever it is you want to do without having to take your focus away from the actual act of driving.
Yeah, I mean, it gets to the point where, like, even if you just want to adjust the volume and you want to use the steering wheel controls, you got to look at the spokes because there's so much crap on there now. Like, I have to study, like, how do I turn on the cruise control on this thing? Because there's, like, 6 buttons for the cruise. Okay, I feel better.
Set, resume, cancel, up, down.
Well, distance.
Set the gap,
Yeah.
the ACC.
Yeah, it's just, I feel better now. It's been cathartic, and I've been driving. I spent last week in the Kia Niro, Niro Touring.
What do you think of the Niro?
I'm very impressed with the Niro. It's one of those cars that kind of lives up to its press release, which I was reading through it, and you're saying like, oh, we're very excited about it. It's got great looks. It has exceptional fuel economy. It's useful, and it's actually fun to drive. I was like, damn it, I actually agree with all of those points. It is fun to drive. It has better steering than the Elantra Sport, which I feel kind of bad saying, but it does have a little bit more feedback from the helm, or at least that was my impression. I didn't drive them back to back, so I may be completely full of crap. But I
think you're right, because I'm actually driving the Elantra Sport right now. And I agree with you. The Niro did have better steering feel. Oh, good. I haven't lost my edge yet. Excellent. At least maybe that part of it. Well, I don't necessarily say that.
Right. No, I mean, it returned like 47, 48, almost 50 miles per gallon. I could have probably returned an average of 50 miles per gallon with it if I had taken it a little easier. And it doesn't make you suffer for that either. It is fun to drive. It rides really well. The ride is super well controlled, and even over high frequency stuff, which tends to give hybrids in particular some fits there, because they're either like super soft like a Prius, where they do glide over high frequency like rough pavement kind of stuff, but they also suck. Because you go into a corner and they have low performance tires on them, and they roll over a bunch, and it's a very crappy driving experience from an enthusiast perspective. The Niro wasn't like that at all. It felt actually very European in its tuning. Just a well thought out car that was well tuned and well set up, regardless of its propulsion system. I was like, this thing would be delightful with a tiny motor and a 5-speed. I'd be fine with that. It's a good basic car, and it has the structure felt solid. And the hybrid stuff, Hyundai's hybrid, I like it a lot, because it has an actual transmission. I think that feels better to me than CVTs.
It does feel more natural than other blended hybrid systems.
Yeah. I did notice every now and then there was a shudder or like just some sort of clunky handoff. But I think no matter how seamless they are, kind of every hybrid's going to have those moments from time to time. So I can't really knock it for that. My biggest complaint really just comes down to the brakes, and it's that regen versus friction braking thing. And I do this in every hybrid. It feels like it's braking stronger than I actually am. So I spend the first couple of days recalibrating, because regen feels like strong braking, and you notice like, hey, my closing speed is still too high, so then you have to step on it a little bit more and engage the friction brakes, and once you figure that out a little bit, and that's like on a per car thing, it's not an issue. The nice thing about the Niro is that,
and the thing is, for most people, that aren't jumping into a different car every week, you're going to get accustomed to that, and you're going to be driving the same car for several years.
Yeah, no, exactly. And the nice thing about the Niro is that it's got some of that crossover styling to it, but it's a hatchback. It's a compact wagon, I guess, if you want to think about it. It's wide, it's relatively low, it's easy to get in and out of, easy to load stuff in. The visibility is really good out of it. The belt line, the cowl is pretty low for a modern car. So I felt like it did all of those things that I love about cars like the Mark 1 and 2 Golfs. It had a lot of that stuff that was just right, sort of like solid fundamentals. And the hybrid stuff is completely unobtrusive, doesn't get in the way. The car is designed for it, so it's not like it sucks up cargo space or anything like that. It's a really clever package, a really well done car, and in touring trim, it's nice, and it's still kind of a bargain because it was like 32 on the sticker, 32.5.
And that's loaded. I mean, you can, like the FE that I drove was like 23,
right?
Delivery charge,
right? Well, that's a crazy aggressive price for a car that's good, because most of the stuff that makes the touring, like, it makes it nice with the leather seats and the nicer trim, and I think it also has the larger screen and the better infotainment system and navigation, which is also all pretty easy to use, which is a key. And if Hyundai can do it, then everybody else should be able to do it, because they're not a super high end brand, and they have consistently put out very good infotainment and solid ergonomics in all their cars over the last 5 years. So they must just be driven enough to really want it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Hyundai and Kia were the first ones to launch Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, to have vehicles that supported both of those, long before any of the other brands. And the interface that they've got, on their current vehicles, is not fancy. But it's simple and easy to use. And they execute really well on really, fundamental things, basic things like, making sure that the screens, the displays that they use, are low glare, so when the sun's shining in from the side, at certain times of the day, it doesn't get washed out, so they're bright enough that you can see them in all conditions. They don't get, you don't get washed out if you're wearing polarized sunglasses and things like that. So, I mean, they just execute really well on the fundamentals.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I like that it has spirit in it. It's a car that, as an enthusiast, I could still get behind. I go, well, this is a fine choice. It's practical, sure, but it's still enjoyable to drive, even with bad hybrid tires on it. And I think my favorite features. I was also very impressed with the smart cruise control, although it doesn't do stop and go, and we've talked about that before, and that's likely just a cost thing at this point, and just the system probably has a single camera or a single sensor or whatever. That's fine.
It's a longer range radar unit.
Yeah.
So they didn't use a short range radar to give it the full stop and go capability.
I mean, that's fine. At $32,000, I'll forgive that. And my favorite feature, really, I think, was like the wireless phone charger. I can just toss my phone in there on the Q iPad and have it charged. Not every car has that, but they should. Like, that's starting to become a lot more common. A lot of new cars have those, at least on the upper trim levels now. I mean, it's been around for so long too. I like that feature a lot, because it's, one fewer set of wires I got to have in the interior. Because God knows you can't drive without charging your phone. So yeah, it's a good car. I expected to be impressed with it, and I was more impressed with it than I thought I would be. So yeah, I give a solid nod to the Niro. I'd like to drive the Ioniq and see how that compares, because they're mostly the same engineering.
Yeah, I mean, mechanically they're identical. I think that the main difference you'll notice, in the driving is just that you sit a little bit lower in the Ioniq. It's even more standard car. The Niro rides a little bit higher, to give it a little more of that crossover look. But it's not as tall as most crossovers, so it's kind of an in between. But other than that, it drives pretty much the same. I mean, it's exactly the same powertrain, the same suspension setup, and same tires. So
there you go. It'll drive just as satisfying. So the Ioniq is the car for the Prius owner who actually likes to drive.
Yes.
Because it kind of looks like a Prius, but if it drives like this, then that's a plus. So, all right. Well, so it's very, very fun garage. Did we want to tee up next week's cars or not? I think we can move on at this point, but
yeah, let's move on. We'll get those next time.
Okay. Speaking of cars, though, there was a big show in Frankfurt.
The Frankfurt Motor Show was, or at least the press previews were this week, and there was quite a bit of stuff there. Some interesting things.
Yeah. Well, and that was we solicited questions on Twitter, and that was somebody's question was like, "What's our favorite stuff from there?" So we should touch on that. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
So did you have a personal favorite of the stuff that came out this week?
The Honda Urban EV. I love that thing.
That's pretty cool.
It's super. It's so clean and just it's a pretty. I hate the interior, but the outside is just great.
Well, I think the impression I get, from the interior, for those who haven't seen it, it's basically two bench seats, front and rear bench seats, and it's a 2-door with rear hinged doors. So you actually get surprisingly good access, to both the front and rear seats, even though it's a pretty small car. Yeah.
Do you think that that's actually going to make production, or is that the typical car show suicide door setup?
My guess is this car probably won't make production in that form. It'll probably come with more conventional doors and more conventional seating. But I think, probably what they were doing here was kind of experimenting a little bit with, layouts for a future autonomous mobility vehicle. Because this sort of layout, with the rear hinge doors, fairly large size doors, hinged at the back, and then, the bench seats, is actually going to give you pretty good, access to both the front and rear seats, good ingress and egress, which would make it, it's easy to slide in and out. If you think about an autonomous, urban mobility vehicle, you're not going to be driving around and cornering at high speeds, and something like that. So you don't really need, form-fitting bucket seats or anything like that. So I think it's an interesting design choice, and I think eventually we'll see cars like that, and we'll probably see something from Honda like that. But I think the production version of this car, when it arrives in 2019, I think is what they said.
Yeah,
and they haven't given any indication of whether it's going to come to the U.S. market.
I think
probably won't.
Right, all assumptions are that it won't, and that's so sad. Why does everybody else consistently for decades get the best Hondas except for us? We couldn't get the Beat. It took us forever to get the Fit. Like, why don't we get good Hondas here?
Because Americans won't buy them.
Maybe if they brought them here, we'd buy them. I know that's a crappy argument. I mean, this car, I don't know that I want to see this particular show car make the transition to production if it's going to get screwed up. Because it's such a it's a pure form on it, which I think is one of the reasons why I'm really impressed by it. And the interior itself is with the large screen that stretches across the front of the cabin. That's clearly not going to be production. So by the time
and that's part of why I think the interior that they did here is more of a look at where they would go with that sort of urban mobility vehicle, 10, 15 years from now, as opposed to what we're going to see as a production car in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. And there's not too much detail. There hasn't been too much detail provided about this car other than, hey, look, it's a neat styling exercise. Reminds you of the CVCC Civics. We don't know too much about the propulsion system and that stuff, do we, or did I just miss it? Because
they haven't really said any mechanical details about the thing, so we have no idea what the range is going to be, what kind of power it's going to have. My guess is, just based on the size, this is likely going to be, a shorter range, 100 to 120 mile range, city car, as opposed to something like the Bolt or the new Leaf, which is more of an all around car.
Yeah. So I mean, I hope that they can be persuaded to bring this to the U.S., but I don't hold out hope. And if they actually build it, I hope they don't screw it up.
Actually, I wouldn't entirely rule it out coming to the U.S. Because they are going to have to sell more EVs here to meet the California zero emission vehicle mandates. And right now, the only battery electric car that they have in the fleet here is the Clarity Electric, which only has like an 84-mile range,
right,
5-mile range,
and that's only available in California, isn't it? Or is it
California and a handful of other states that are following the California rules. So, it's not going to, that one's not going to be available nationwide, so I wouldn't rule out something like this car, production version of this car coming here. At least for California, that's probably, where it'll be the most popular. Although, something like this could be a hit, in places like New York as well. Yeah.
I love it. I like its design purity. I'm on a kick right now for design purity. Regardless, I have instructed my staff to when we design things as a starting point, go with Bauhaus, not Beaux-Arts. So just very clean and functional. And I think that's what really draws me to it. And then it's got thin pillars and great proportions. And so as a design, I like the Honda Urban EV. But what was your favorite from the show?
My favorite was the Kia Proceed.
That's not hard to love. Not at all.
Again, though, another car that we'll probably never see on America.
You don't think they'll bring it here?
No.
They've been very aggressive about really building out their lineup. I mean, I'm shocked that they made a coupe and just all of the moves that both Hyundai and Kia have made have been they really want to own a larger slice of the market. So.
Yeah, but they're moving more aggressively on expanding their utility lineup over here. So we're going to see the Stonic, or however you pronounce that, their subcompact utility coming here next year. I think they're just, again, this is one of those, shooting brake, estate car type of design that is just not going to appeal to American drivers. I think the only way we would ever see this car here is if they added some black wheel arch extensions and jacked it up about 2 inches.
That would be
called it the Proceed Tour X.
That'd be cool in its own right, I think. Not as cool as something this sleek, for sure, but
yeah, I mean, this is just a stunning machine. I mean, I would love to have a car like this.
You know what I love about it, and I kind of love this about Kia overall, is they're giving you premium design. Like it's the best design doesn't have to cost the most money. You look at any Kia out there right now. I mean, the Sportage looks like a damn Porsche. It's just
absolutely. It does look like it's got a lot of hints of the Macan.
Yeah. So I love that. That's like it's great design for the masses, because really when you think about it, like why should you have to pay more for great design? And I understand that part of the thing that you pay for is the great design, but that doesn't mean that it has to be exclusive like that. And you think back through history, some of the most iconic and best designs are super easily accessible things, like the Coca-Cola bottle, for example. It's one of those things, like we're gonna they're committing to making great design a part of what that brand means and what that brand is, and I'm impressed, and I continue to be impressed by their concept cars. I also love the way the CD pillars echo like early 60s GM wagons.
Yeah. I would love to see, this body put onto the Stinger platform. That would be fantastic. I mean, the Stinger, I think, is a great looking car anyway, but I think this would make it even better.
So you have a thing for wagons, clearly.
Yes. Someone that writes about cars, I think that isn't that kind of mandatory.
It seems to be like the starter kit. It doesn't have to be mandatory. It's kind of like, it's like if every college student likes Led Zeppelin, is Led Zeppelin any good? And I'm just picking that. You may not like Led Zeppelin. I'm just saying.
You're starting to veer into heresy now, Dan. It's sounding just vaguely like maybe you don't like Led Zeppelin.
I fucking love Led Zeppelin. I don't know what you're talking about.
The way you said that,
Yeah, sorry. As I've gotten older, I've grown to appreciate the fact that some people don't like screaming vocals. I get it. That was never the reason why I listened to Zepp. It was always the rhythm section. Yeah, no, Bonham. God, I mean, he plays with such authority. Yeah. Anyway, we can talk about that later. What did you think of the AMG Project One thing? Everybody's sort of the internet was like, hey, here's this thing. It's this new AMG concept car. And then 10 minutes later, everybody was like, man, that sucks. It's ugly. It's just terrible. I don't know.
It's not pretty.
I don't think it's ugly though.
So really not the first, I would say it's not even the first supercar with a Formula One engine. I mean, if you go back to the Ferrari F50, 20 years ago, the V12 in there was derived from the Formula One engine of that era, from the Ferrari V12 F1 engine of that.
Well, right. And wasn't even the F40 with its small turbocharged V8 kind of the same thing, or very racing inspired?
It was racing inspired, but they had never raced a twin turbo V8. That engine had no direct lineage to any competition engine. And the F40 was derived from the 288 GTO, which was built as a Group B car. So the F40 was developed as a competition car. It was actually, it started life as the GTO Evolution.
Right.
And then when Group B got canceled, they turned it into another model of its own. But that's a whole other story.
Group B wasn't Group B the best?
It was amazing.
All the best stuff, all of the things I love came from Group B.
The Ford RS200.
Yeah.
The Peugeot Turbo 205 Turbo.
The Volvo 240 Turbo was a Group B car.
Was it?
I think so. I mean, maybe it was some other group, but it was. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think that was a Group N Touring or Group A.
Oh, Group A. It was Group A. Group A.
Yeah.
It was Group something.
Oh.
Was the Delta Integrale a Group B car?
Well, the Integrale came later. It was actually the Delta S4 was the Group B car.
Right.
And then they toned that down, and eventually that the Integrale was developed. But yeah, the S4, the Porsche 959 was a Group B car. The MG Metro 6R4, insane little machine. There was all kinds of crazy things that came out.
Group B was bonkers. I specifically remember the 959 was like sort of the pinnacle of Group B, and then
But the project, the AMG Project One, I'm not crazy about the way it looks. Interesting. The power. What's interesting about the powertrain is I just saw something just came out today or yesterday. That engine, in testing on the Mercedes F1 engine, which is a twin turbo 1.6 liter V6. Or sorry, a single turbo 1.6 liter V6, with the energy recovery systems they've got on there. They were doing some dyno testing, and they've actually gotten that thing to get a thermodynamic efficiency of over.
Right. Yeah, I saw that today too. That's crazy.
Which is, the Toyota Prius, is considered, that's like one of the most efficient internal combustion engines on the road today. And that thing gets just over 40% efficiency, and what that means is that, they're turning 40% of the energy in the fuel it burns into tractive effort,
right, into work,
into work,
right,
that the wheels are doing. And with the the Mercedes F1 power plant, they've got that up over 50%, which is just insane for. I mean, obviously it's not going to have the absolute efficiency of a Prius, because it makes 1,000 horsepower. But, still to be able to extract that much energy, so there's clearly lessons to be learned from that can be applied to production powertrains, to improve the efficiency. And one of those things is adding the heat recovery, heat energy recovery, using the turbocharger. So that's one of the ways that they extract more of the energy.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing that's always been the biggest issue with making internal combustion efficient, right? Is so much of the engine is just, or so much of the energy is lost to, it's just heat. And to be able to use that heat in some way has been the trick. And so, I just think it's a cool car. I don't care how pretty it is. It's not, I guess it's not classically beautiful, which is fine. Like we expect concept cars maybe, or show cars to just always be gorgeous. This is a concept of a different stripe.
This isn't even a
yeah.
I mean, they're going to be actually producing a batch of these. I'm not sure how many, but, it's going to be very low volume and crazy expensive, but they are going to build some.
I mean, it looks like it's got serious aero. The way it's got like giant vents in the hood, so that that the air comes in the front and goes up through heat exchangers and then just up over the roof from the hood. It's a very engineering car. You look at it and you can see the engineering all over it, and I like that, and I like that it doesn't have some damn throwback grille and round lights on it too. It's fine. If that's what modern Mercedes start to look like, I'm down with that. That's works for me. Can we talk about how stupid the Ferrari Portofino name is? I don't care how good the car is. The name is dumb.
Why?
It just sounds like some kind of 80s restaurant crap. I don't know. Go down to the Portofino grill. It's my own internal bias. I just don't like the name.
Okay.
It sounds lame.
It is a gorgeous
It's
car.
beautiful. I'm sure it's wonderful.
Much better than the California ever was.
Yeah, the California is also a stupid name, which I realize is a throwback, but it's just, yeah. Yeah, what else did you like from the show, or what else stood out?
Something that I thought was really interesting was the Jaguar I-Pace race car. The Jaguar I-Pace e-Trophy, which is, they announced that Jaguar is going to be doing a single make race series as a support series for Formula E starting next year. And they're going to use a race prepped version of the I-Pace electric crossover, which I think is very interesting, and I think could really help put a dent in Tesla and the Model X, because one of the things that Tesla has built its brand reputation on is performance, but really that performance is actually very limited. Essentially they're great at doing a quarter mile runs and 0 to 60, but they don't handle very well. And over any sustained amount of driving, they actually start to lose a lot of performance very quickly because the batteries and electronics and motors start to overheat. And so it within a couple of minutes of hard driving, it actually has to scale back the control system has to scale back the performance pretty significantly. And putting the I-Pace out there on the track and having them run lap after lap and seeing what kind of performance they can get out of these things, on a track, as opposed to just at a drag strip, could be, it could really demonstrate, that the Jaguar, is taking what they know about building fast cars and applied it to an EV. So you've got a true high performance EV here, as opposed to just a high performance, an electric drag racer. Yeah,
Jaguar seemed to go whole hog with the electrification and the SUVs together. I think that's actually smart and very fascinating to watch. I wonder what Jaguar is going to look like in 5 years. But I'm certain that they're going to be here in 5 years because they're making changes.
Yeah, well, they also announced, they're like Volvo, and we'll be seeing other brands announcing the same thing, that their entire lineup is going to be electrified from 2020 onwards, which doesn't mean they're all going to be electric, but they're all going to be at the very least hybrids,
right?
Probably 48-volt mild hybrids as a base setup, and then plug-ins and battery electrics as the up-level model.
It's just the way they've embraced it. Like wholeheartedly, which is it's surprising coming from a brand such as Jaguar, but maybe not, because they're such a small brand that they know it's sort of all or nothing. I don't know, but it's been curious to watch. I think Motor Trend also noticed that the I-Pace that was on the show stand in Frankfurt seemed to be like the production version. Because it had,
well, I mean, we've been seeing, there've been pictures popping up of the production version, out testing, both with camouflage, but there's also been some photos that have shown up, spy photos of, like advertising photo shoots with the car, in finished form. And there was some speculation that they would show the production I-Pace at Frankfurt, but I think it sounds like they may be holding it for the LA Auto Show in November and show it there, where they showed the concept last year.
Yeah. I think the last thing that I can think of that really stands out so much from Frankfurt is that BMW X7. Which is just,
that, what the hell were they?
So here's my thought. This is not for us. Like, they'll sell them to people who want them because they're BMWs and they lease the hell out of them. And like these cars generate profit multiple times. And because it's a BMW, it will get sold. But I think BMW is saying, well, what kind of styling really appeals to emerging markets? And by emerging markets, I mean, what's going to sell in China that has a huge appetite for vehicles, and a huge potential ongoing appetite for vehicles, especially high-end stuff. Although that may be cooling off somewhat. I think this is not necessarily designed to appeal quite as much or primarily to a Western audience, but more towards the places that own all our debt and therefore have all the money.
Well, for BMW's sake, I hope it appeals to somebody.
Yeah, it looks a lot more like a Chinese car to me. So I'm just thinking,
No, I think you're probably right. That's probably where most of them will end up. Well, that in Beverly Hills.
Yeah, and I mean,
I
can think of nothing more gauche and disgusting than Beverly Hills. That's not true. Yeah. I can, but
South Beach, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dallas.
Oh, yeah, Dallas. But it's trucks in Dallas.
That's true. Well, I mean, this thing's as big as a truck.
That's true. That's true. But it's foreign.
Yeah.
I don't know. We should move on.
Yes.
we can bash concept cars all day long. So, there's been a couple of other developments. Briefly, the NTSB talked about a Tesla Autopilot crash, which dovetails nicely with the updated autonomous guidelines. Did you want to touch on those, or do we want to just joke?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. On Tuesday morning, just before Elaine Chao, the Secretary of Transportation, came here to Ann Arbor to make an announcement at M-City about updated federal autonomous driving guidelines. The NTSB issued its report on the Josh Brown crash last year, and for those that don't recall, that was in May of 2016. A Tesla owner named Josh Brown was going down a road in Florida in his Model S with autopilot engaged at about 85 miles an hour, and a truck turned left across his path, and autopilot failed to recognize that the truck was turning across its path and just continued along its merry way, going right underneath the trailer and slicing the top half of the car off. there was, lots of speculation about what was going on, at the time, that, he may have been watching a movie or something like that instead of paying attention to the road like he should have been. Turns out, there was no actual evidence of any of that. The National Transportation Safety Board did an investigation, and it was their first investigation in a case of automated or semi-automated driving. And it was interesting to see what they came up with. The prior investigation by NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, was they ruled in that Tesla was not at fault. That the system did what it was supposed to. In this case here, NTSB took a little bit different approach to the problem. They did say that the system autopilot worked as it was supposed to, as it was designed to within its limitations, but they also called out the fact that the system, like other semi-automated systems, level 2 and level 1 systems, does have limits, and they called on car makers to be more aggressive in both educating consumers as to what those limits are, and also putting in safeguards to make sure that the systems can only be used where it's appropriate. So Tesla had previously said that autopilot should only be used on limited access divided highways. It shouldn't be used in other conditions where there might be intersections and things like that, or in cities. But they didn't do anything to actually prevent drivers from using it that way, from misusing it. And so, NTSB said, manufacturers should be more proactive in making sure that the systems can only be used where they can actually work properly. And they said, they also said that the driver of this car, was over reliant on the system because, they expected it to be able to do more than it.
Well, because it's called autopilot.
Well, exactly. And, so, they also called on manufacturers to do more in terms of driver monitoring, and making sure that the drivers, in a car like this where it's not a fully automated system, where the driver is supposed to remain alert and ready to take over, to make sure that those drivers, to monitor the driver and make sure that they are ready to take over if needed. And if not, to, bring the car to a safe stop if necessary. So those are things that Tesla has not done yet. And really, I think, the first manufacturer that's doing that is GM with Super Cruise. They have both driver monitoring and geofencing in their system. And I'll actually be driving that on a road trip in a couple of weeks. So I'll tell you how well it works. But, it'll be interesting to see, if other car makers, how they respond to this, and if they start to make some changes in their systems. Some companies like BMW and Volvo and Mercedes-Benz, if they start to add driver monitoring or geofencing to their systems to make sure that they can't be misused, or to minimize the chances of them being misused.
Well, GM is really used to being sued when they put technology in cars. So I think if anybody, they're going to be the ones that either are the most responsible or the most conservative, or consider those cases of, what's going to happen, who's responsible here. Let's either make sure that we're indemnified, or we shift the responsibility to the consumer and in some way, just if that means making the system less capable or something. Like, they're going to have to figure that out.
Yep.
It's not a revelation though. Like it's kind of like, when you don't do anything to really stop the perception that, yes, this car can drive. And I'm getting this even still today. Is like, people think that Teslas just drive themselves, and they're like the most sophisticated car, and they are a very sophisticated car. And
unfortunately, Tesla hasn't done anything to dissuade people from that opinion. And in fact, the things that Elon Musk has said has probably reinforced that opinion.
Right. That's really irresponsible. And I think as a corporate entity, like, you want to push Tesla certainly wants to push innovation. I get it. And it is a differentiator for their cars that they have this system and it's out there. And we've talked about how they're kind of using the public as beta testers, and the public are willing beta testers because they don't know any better, largely.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. When you're doing medical testing, they have this concept of informed consent, and the idea is, when you're going to be testing something that puts you at risk, potentially puts you at risk, you have to really understand what are those risks, what can go wrong, what can whatever it is you're testing do, and what can it not do, and you have to understand that before you get involved. And in the case of autopilot and other systems, people really don't understand that, and that's why we need to do a better job of educating consumers as to what these systems can and cannot do. And I actually just finished writing my October column for Automotive Engineering today, talking about that. About how we one of the things we should take a look at doing is maybe standardizing the naming of these systems. I mean, right now, you've got marketers, coming up with all kinds of different branding. Just look at adaptive cruise control systems.
Right.
Some companies calling it radar cruise control, others call it smart cruise control, intelligent cruise, or intelligent speed control. So you've got all these different brand names for the same thing, and they don't necessarily. In a lot of cases, some of the, especially as you get into higher levels of automation like autopilot and drive pilot, they don't. What the systems can actually do is not really properly reflected in the name. It's not. We should be coming up with better, names that describe the actual functionality of the system.
Yeah, well, and I think they're all being generally oversold at this point, and I don't think that's going to change so much until there is some, like, we've got levels, right? We've got the levels to define the autonomy, and that hasn't really caught on.
It's caught on within the industry.
Right.
Regular people have no idea what any of that.
Right. I mean, the car geeks, like, we've been talking about BMW platform numbers for years, and normal people don't do that. So I don't expect them to talk about the level numbers. But, I think that's one thing, like, yes, the companies that sort of release this stuff blithely, giving it some sort of clever name that makes it sound like it's more amazing than it actually is. It's cool tech, and it actually does work quite well in a large variety of situations. But, the Secretary of Transportation, the DOT, hasn't really helped the situation, because they're out there basically just blowing sunshine up everybody's ass too. Like, these 80, Elaine Chao herself, her quote is like, ADS technology offers important social benefits by improving access to transportation, independence, and quality of life for those who cannot drive because of illness, advanced age, or disability. Like, yes, but she's also pointing out that these systems are the key to a future with fewer traffic fatalities and more mobility. I think the more mobility part is right, but it's not like tomorrow. And the systems may also reduce fatalities, but I honestly think that's not the autonomous driving stuff that's reducing fatalities. It's blind spot detection, automatic braking, stability control. It's all of the stuff that's pretty much already in cars that is going to really reduce fatalities, and that kind of stuff is going to be more effective at it than a car that drives itself. Well,
I think over the longer term, I think highly automated driving it certainly has the potential to dramatically reduce fatalities and crashes. We're never going to get to zero. There's always going to be things that happen that we can't anticipate. And systems will fail. Hardware will fail from time to time. But I think there is a huge potential for dramatically reducing fatalities and crashes and injuries. And there's also the societal benefit of making mobility accessible to more people. I mean, on Tuesday when Elaine Chao was here, one of the other speakers that was there was a gentleman named Mark Riccobono, who I was on a panel with him back in January at the Automobility conference that ran along with the Detroit Auto Show. And Mark is the president of the National Federation of the Blind. I mean, if you're blind, having the ability, today, you've got to rely on taxis or, other services that aren't that reliable a lot of times. And if you can have access to an autonomous vehicle to take you wherever you need to go, whenever you need to go, having that freedom, the same kind of freedom that you and I have, to just get in the car and go anywhere we want, anytime we want. That's hugely important, especially, if you want to be able to go to work, go to school, wherever, having that flexibility to do that. And, whether you're blind or you have some other reason why you can't drive, that's hugely important for society. And I think that's hugely beneficial. And, but as you said, it's going to take a long time before we get there. This is not something that's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years.
Well, yeah, and the safety guidelines don't seem to be there yet. And from what a lot of the talk is like voluntary.
It's all voluntary. There are no regulations now covering automated vehicles. Like even the bill that was passed by the House of Representatives last week, mainly what that does is it provides exemptions for up to 100,000 vehicles per year from manufacturers to bypass the regulations that require cars to have a steering wheel and pedal.
Yeah, see, that's what I don't. I don't really want representatives or senators passing bills on this stuff without the formation of some sort of like select working group or something of actual experts to craft.
I wouldn't want any politicians, any current politicians involved in formulating that. But actually, the bill that they passed, in a lot of ways, I think is actually pretty good. One of the things that's in there, surprisingly enough, and I'll be shocked if it remains in there in whatever the final form of the bill is assuming it gets passed by the Senate and signed into law. But one of the things that's in there right now is it calls on NHTSA to start developing some safety regulations, some motor vehicle safety standards for autonomous vehicles, within 2 years after the law is enacted. And that, Congress actually calling on NHTSA to, the current Congress calling on NHTSA to actually enact some new regulations is shocking. But, that's what the House of Representatives passed last week. When I was at the event on Tuesday, I chatted with people from a number of different manufacturers and suppliers. The general consensus is that, we should have some regulations, covering, that set some baseline performance requirements for these systems, in terms of what sorts of things need to be able to be detected, in certain conditions and that sort of thing. Much as we do today with braking systems, lighting systems, occupant protection systems, some baseline standards. But, what we don't want to specify any particular technologies. We just need to say, whatever technology you choose needs to be able to do this.
Right, and I think that's sort of what I'm afraid of by having people who aren't really equipped to understand what they're legislating about sort of say like it must be this. No, I think the end goal is fine. Like it must be able to do this. Great. Now go figure out how to do it, and that's where sort of
and Congress isn't going to do that. And the bill that was passed, doesn't try to specify what should be done or even what sort of regulations. Just that NHTSA has to start looking at formulating some regulations.
Yeah, and I think honestly, for me, the biggest issue isn't even the self-driving tech. Like that'll get sorted. It's more about. What are we doing with driver education? Because I feel like it's probably a tired subject for anybody who's heard me yapping about it, but like I think that's key to it's like immediately having an impact on reducing incidents and fatalities. They're up over the last few years because apparently we need the dopamine hit of playing with our phones at every stoplight, and I see it every morning on my commute, and it's just ridiculous. I don't know that training people better will really have a huge impact on that, but it's worth trying to a degree. I don't know. And also like everything you think about like V2V and V2X, like everything's going to be connected. So there's that cybersecurity part of it. And then data logging. Is my data, or is, the automaker going to give me a really good price on the car because they've got a deal which they haven't disclosed that just it logs and aggregates my trips and then sells that to somebody who wants to sell people like me stuff, and then I wind up seeing advertising in some other way. Like that terrifies me. Just it's not even that I'm afraid of it. And so it's less that it terrifies me than it aggravates me. The idea of like my data is not my own, or potentially is not my own. Those are, I think, things that are much harder to solve and that bug me even more.
Well, actually, right now, the policies that all the manufacturers have is that the data that comes from the vehicle is owned by the vehicle. It belongs to the vehicle
for now.
So for now.
But when you're leasing a car, what is it like? You know what I'm saying?
I mean, when you have, whether you buy or lease a car, if it's your car, if it's titled to you, you own that data, and anything that they do with it, you have to opt in for it to be used for anything. Now, looking out a few years, 5, 10, 15 years, when we don't own our vehicles, if we're using autonomous mobility services, now it's a totally different situation because you don't own that vehicle. Somebody else owns it, and we have to figure out, does the data still belong to whoever owns the vehicle, whether that's Maven or Waymo or Lyft or some other company that's operating that service, or does it belong to the individual that's riding in that vehicle?
See, the data, in my opinion,
I think it's probably going to be the former.
Right.
I don't think you're going to own the data from those vehicles,
which
in that case.
I don't like that, because the data wouldn't be generated if it were not for my activity. Therefore, it's my data, so I own it. Like
that would be the ideal case, but realistically, I don't see that.
Of course not, because they can't sell it if I own it.
Right.
Damn it. Yeah, I envision a future where I will be walking and biking a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, what could possibly go wrong with somebody having your data? I mean, what, you think somebody's going to hack into a credit bureau and steal 143 million people's personal data?
Right.
That couldn't.
No. I mean, like, and why?
What's the worst case scenario?
Right. People wonder why I don't want to have like Waze on my phone and stuff. Like, no. I'm not a tinfoil hat guy, but I just don't want my information out there. I don't know. It's just I'm not. I don't want to go live in a hole in my backyard, but like some of this stuff is like, do you really want companies knowing this much about? I think the disgusting part is it's just like it's boxed up and sold, and I don't see any of that benefit. I am the product. That bugs the hell out of me. So there.
Well, I mean, they're trying to, they're developing services that they hope that you will see as being beneficial.
I see, but I don't want their damn service. I don't want it. Like so many of the services now that are services. I don't want Uber. I don't want Drizzly. I don't want, what's the one with they deliver lunch.
Grub.
Sort of like that. I forget what it is.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. Yeah.
Don't try to pay me with Venmo. Get the hell out of here. Give me cash money. Like, I don't want any of that stuff.
What is this cash?
Right. Like, I envision a future where at some point I will try to pay for something with a $5 bill and I will get arrested because only dissidents use paper money. Otherwise, it's the chip that's, implanted in your. I don't want the chip.
Give him a nugget of gold.
Yeah, and that's what it's going to be. Like, all of a sudden, I'm going to turn into one of those crazy nut jobs that's putting all my money in gold, just because it's like the most secure investments. Like, yeah, fine. Gangsters and pirates put all their they don't have any assets other than the jewelry, which they can hawk for fast money. Anyway, we've beaten this one to death. Speaking about hawking for fast money, though, those Volkswagens that are out by you, there was a bunch of them stolen.
Yeah, apparently a few dozen. The Pontiac Silverdome, which was the former home of the Detroit Lions and has been unused for the past.
Seems like an unlucky place.
Yeah, well, I mean, over the past 9-10 months since VW started buying back diesels, they've been storing them in various locations around the country, and there's about 9,000 of them parked in the parking lot at the Silverdome. Well, it turns out a few dozen of them didn't quite make it. Either didn't make it to the Silverdome at all, or left the Silverdome parking lot prematurely, and ended up at some auction sites in Indiana, I think.
So they weren't like sold to like recyclers and scrapped and cut up for parts.
No, they were resold. Somebody whoever got the cars generated some fake titles for them and sent them to auction, and they were resold. Some of them were resold, others were intercepted before they could be sold, because what happened was the VINs, VW is tracking the VIN numbers, the vehicle identification numbers of all of these diesel vehicles, and when somebody tried to register them again after they were sold, these VINs popped up in VW's system again because they it's part of the where they have to buy back these cars. They have to keep track of them because they can't be resold until they're repaired. And these have obviously not been repaired, and suddenly they started seeing duplicate VIN numbers in their system, and so they contacted the authorities, the Oakland County Sheriff's Department, and started looking into it. So they're still investigating. They don't know. They suspect it was some kind of inside job. So some of these cars, just got redirected and resold instead.
Yeah.
I figured, hey, there's 9,000 diesels here. Who's just going to miss 60 of them?
Right. That's a great scam. But so somebody who bought one of these cars, now, does it just get repossessed? Do they know where the cars are? Do they?
That's a good question. I don't know. It's not clear what's going to happen to them. I mean, clearly, they don't have they weren't bought with legitimate title.
Did you buy one? Because I know you were fond of your Volkswagen diesel.
No, we no longer possess a Volkswagen diesel.
Okay.
We went with Honda.
So it wasn't. Yeah. Nobody we know. I'm just trying to think how would you even buy one of these cars? It's going to set off alarms. The whole deal is going to look shady.
The thing is, not all of the cars have been, not every TDI owner, opted in for the buyback. I mean, I think VW's bought back about 300,000 of the cars so far, out of 450,000 or so that were eligible. But there's still probably, upwards of 100,000 out there still running around. And, there's nothing to stop those people from selling them to somebody else, or sending them, trading them in. They don't have to go back to Volkswagen. At some point they will have to be repaired. But it's, just because a used TDI is going down an auction line doesn't necessarily mean that it's not legit. It could very well be legit.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, usually the cars at auction are, the ones that go to auction are usually used cars that, dealers have taken as trade-ins, and they decide, we don't need these cars, these are cars we don't need in inventory, or else they're off-lease cars. And, so they go to auction, and they usually end up getting bought by other dealers, and then, cleaned up, fixed up, and then sold to consumers. So, I mean, it's not generally individuals selling the cars here. So, it's, I don't know. I have no idea how this is all going to play out in the end.
New Volkswagen diesels for everyone, because I mean, that's the only way we're going to be made whole. I think we should all just get a diesel car. It should be a birthright. It's never going to happen.
Speaking of, one of the listener questions that we had come in on Twitter this evening before we started recording asked for some thoughts on the Mazda Skyactiv X engine, which some of the folks that went to Frankfurt this week prior to the show, they got a technical briefing from Mazda and had a chance for an early drive in one of the development mules that they have running over there. And so we learned a little bit more of the details of Mazda's kind of gas diesel crossover engine. And turns out it's, one of the, HCCI, the concept of homogeneous charge compression ignition, which is basically trying to make a car that runs on gasoline operate more like a diesel and get diesel efficiency, is an idea that's been around for a while. And a bunch of car makers have been working on it, but none have brought it to production up until now because, the way HCCI works, is, compression ignition in general. If you remember your chemistry, if you take a volume of gas and you compress it into a smaller volume, the pressure is going to go up and the temperature is going to go up. And if you do that with air in the cylinder of an engine, and you put air in and then you close the valves and you compress, the piston goes up, you compress it, eventually it's going to get hot enough that if you add some fuel, it will combust. And that's what compression ignition is. With HCCI, what they do is, you mix in the air, the fuel as the air is coming in, and it gets blended together, trying to create a homogeneous mixture. Just basically, an even distribution of the gasoline vapor across the air in a very lean mixture of air and fuel, and that. One of the issues is that works great at light load conditions and at lower speeds, but nobody's ever been able to get it to work well at higher load conditions. And so for all these engines, they've had to be able to switch back and forth between doing compression ignition during light load conditions and then regular spark ignition during heavier load conditions. And, the system, they've had some issues with that transition between the two modes, and back about 8 or 9 years ago, I had a chance to drive a couple of GM prototypes with HCCI engines, and they were okay, but they weren't really refined enough and consistent enough for production. And so GM's continued to research the technology, but they've never put it into production. And so Mazda came up with a really interesting approach to doing this that's a little bit different from what anybody else has done before. And they don't actually call it an HCCI engine. They call it spark controlled compression.
Yeah, which, it's not really HCCI. It's like a very, in reading the description, I guess, it almost doesn't sound like it's compression ignition. It just sounds like it's the latest evolution of what's been going on for years, getting a locally rich mixture near the spark plug, and having it lean elsewhere. Like that's not new. That's something that's it's probably
it's kind of a hybrid.
Yeah.
It is compression ignition, because what they're doing is, when they're in the compression ignition mode, when the intake valve's open, you're drawing in air and adding fuel to it, and it's mixing that into a homogeneous mixture.
And so, that's actually what makes this much harder than diesel too, because with diesel, you heat the air first and then you squirt the fuel in, and it burns.
And the air is hot enough that you get that spontaneous ignition.
Right. This, you've got the fuel in there, so you've got to really be careful. Because it could detonate, and that's like you're not squirting the fuel in after the air is hot. You're squirting the fuel in, squeezing it, and that makes the mixture homogeneous, but it also makes it much more difficult to control.
Right, and so it's you have to really manage the pressure in the cylinder very carefully, to be able to control when it's going to ignite. And so this is what makes what Mazda is doing so interesting, because once the intake valve closes, the piston goes back up and compresses it. It heats it up, gets it up close to where it will self-ignite, and then they spray in just a little bit more fuel in there at just the right time, right by the spark plug, and ignite that, so you have like you said, a very localized, rich mixture right next to the spark plug. And the key is the timing of when you do that, when you spray in that fuel, and then ignite that with the spark plug. And what that's actually doing when you do that, it's actually creating a pressure wave. So that bit of fuel that's burning, it's not actually the flame front of that fuel that's igniting that mixture, that homogeneous mixture, but it's actually just creating a pressure wave that is then increasing the pressure on that homogeneous mixture to the point where it gets hot enough that it will ignite itself.
So it's just like it's that last little bit, that last little push over the edge. It's very clever.
Yeah.
Very clever.
Oh, yeah, it's brilliant. And if it actually works as well as they claim and works consistently, this is a brilliant solution. I mean, this is one of those things that, over the years, Mazda has always come up with these really what seem like harebrained ideas, and somehow they make them work. And
this one
is really clever,
like the Wankel.
Yeah, well, like the Wankel. Even the existing Sky Active engines. Yeah. They've done some really creative things over the years. I mean, they were the first ones to do a production Miller cycle engine.
Oh, that's right.
In the Amati back in the mid '90s. So this is a really clever idea, and it takes to do that, to spray that fuel in. When they're near top dead center, that high pressure, they need a much higher pressure fuel injection system than you typically use with a gasoline engine. So like with modern engines with direct injection, for gasoline engines, because they're spraying it in when the intake valve is open and the air is coming in, those are typically running at about 2,000 PSI. And for modern diesel engines, common rail diesel engines, those are running at about anywhere from 25 to 30,000 PSI. Because as you said, it doesn't spray the fuel in until you've already compressed the air. For this one, they're running somewhere between 7,500 and 10,000 PSI. So it's higher than gasoline direct injection, but much lower than with modern diesel engines. And so that's the main thing that's adding cost to this thing, is having that higher pressure system in there. But it's still going to be much cheaper than a diesel engine to manufacture. They figure it's going to come in about halfway between a gas and a diesel engine. And then, it doesn't need all the after treatment systems that modern diesels do, because it's not producing the NOx and the particulates like diesel engines are doing. So it's going to be interesting to watch this, to see how well this works. I'll be curious to get a chance to drive this.
Yeah, well, and the thing too that I didn't realize was it has a Roots blower on it as well. So it's
yeah. And this is part of what they're using to manage, to keep the air fuel mixture so lean, that homogeneous mixture, to keep it lean, is they've got an electromagnetically clutched Roots blower that they can use to help manage the air fuel mixture So, under light load conditions, or actually, sorry, under heavier load conditions and at higher speeds, they can use that to pump more air into the engine to keep that mixture lean and allow it to run in this SCCI mode.
So is that like they just ensure that there's an oversupply of air at any time?
Yeah. Yeah.
So they can just sort of bleed off, and they can fine tune. So that's almost like the old 2-stroke diesels that had and they had roots. They had a positive displacement blower for this almost the same reason, kind of.
Yeah, and then even when it's running in spark mode, in regular spark combustion mode, it's still running as a Miller cycle engine. So a Miller cycle, for those that don't know, is basically an Atkinson cycle with boosting added. So with either a supercharger or turbocharger added on. So you've got the late intake valve closing that gives you effectively a shorter compression stroke than the
expansion, right? Yeah.
Expansion stroke, but that when you're the Atkinson cycle is very efficient, but you lose a lot of torque production, and so adding the blower on there actually helps to enhance the torque, so you get better performance that way without sacrificing the efficiency so much. And then the other thing in the Motor Trend article that Frank Marcus wrote about this, basically describe this whole thing both in compression ignition and spark ignition modes. Essentially what they've done is they've figured out a way to create an engine with variable compression, because that timing in compression ignition, the timing of when you spray that fuel and ignite it to create that pressure wave is effectively giving you, depending on how much fuel you put in there and when you put it in, you can control how much pressure you're getting and affect what the effective compression ratio is going to be. So you create a variable compression ratio engine without the crazy linkage that Infiniti has on the variable compression engine that actually moves the pistons up and down relative to the
right, and with much finer control than an earlier version of a variable compression engine, which is just forced induction. But that's a lot more reactive in its implementation, a lot more basic, a lot more rudimentary. Yeah, I don't think that those like crazy contraptions with extra linkages in the connecting rods and stuff to actually move things around are gonna really be long lived. It just seems like a whole bunch of reliability stuff that it's like a fantastical flying machine. Like, yeah, it works, but it's kind of medieval. Versus,
especially when you compare it to this thing.
Yeah. No, I'm really, really even more curious now, because it just seems like it's so well thought out and so carefully done that I'm sort of surprised that nobody else has really hit upon the same combination of factors, because it's always one of those things, like elegant engineering and like an elegant solution. Generally, each piece of it is sort of like a forehead slap, like, oh, of course. But when they put it together and then they fine tune it, it just becomes more than the sum of its parts. It's very elegant, and I'm impressed by that. And I'm a little surprised that it took Mazda to bring it to market, but because I'm fond of Mazda, I'm glad at the same time.
I'll next time I run into Dan Nicholson, the head of powertrain engineering at GM, I'll be curious to ask him about his thoughts on this, because the last time I talked to him a month or two ago about the Equinox diesel, I asked him, what he thought about what Mazda was doing. And at that time, none of us knew yet, the details of how they were doing this. And he said, that they were still working on the HCCI, but they hadn't come up with the secret sauce to really make it work right for production. And it looks like Mazda may have done that this time.
Yeah, and the rest of the car is improved as well. So it's not just a new engine. From the article that Frank Marcus wrote too. Like, it's a good article. We'll link to it in the show notes. Yep. But it's Mazda's sort of commitment to Kaizen, or continuous improvement, which is, I think, part of why the 3 has been such a darling for us for so many years too. It's a good car. It's well engineered, well thought out. And who, Mazda could use its own sort of special differentiator more than just about anyone too, being such a small and now independent automaker.
Yeah, and it's curious. When you see stuff like this, it's no wonder that when Robert Davis was speaking last month at the management briefing seminars, he said we should really reconsider mandating specific technologies like electrification and just focus on here's the targets we want for energy use or CO2 emissions or whatever, however you want to do it, and say here's your target, use whatever technology works to get there, because clearly they've got some cool ideas for how to get there without having to resort to big heavy.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's very much like we were talking about with the autonomous stuff as well. Just define the goals and then let the market innovate. It's that sort of free market kind of thing, right? So yeah, and if we can get there with efficiency without having to dig battery raw materials out of the ground and make batteries, it's kind of a win in some ways. So cool. I think that's about it. We did have a couple of Twitter questions. Oh, you know what? I did dig up some questions from our phone messages. So here's a couple. I'll dig up more, but these are 2 good starter ones. So the first question we had, the very first voicemail that was like usable, wasn't testing or a hang up or something, was why we are not on the Zune marketplace. And that was for the Autobot podcast. We might have missed the boat on that one, but we'll try with this one. Okay.
Okay. Actually, the Zune marketplace has been gone for years.
Yeah. That voicemail, I believe, was from 2009. So here's.
I actually do still have a Zune HD in a drawer.
So this is the thing. The Zune actually had some interesting features. It was not terrible to use, and it sounded better than an iPod.
Yeah, well, the last one they did, the Zune HD, was actually quite a good MP3 player. I mean, unfortunately, by the time it came out in 2009 or even 2010, maybe, the smartphone was already taking over from standalone MP3 players anyway. Yeah. But it was actually a really nice little device, and my son used it for a couple.
Yeah, I still use my Sony. It's the HD5, the network Walkman. It's basically like a teeny tiny little laptop hard drive. And it sounds fantastic, and I can load it up with Wave, or if I want more music, I can use A-Tracks, which is the Sony compression scheme. It's like MP3, but it's a little different.
Proprietary. Won't work on it.
Because it's Sony, and that's what Sony does. But Sony makes great stuff, and they always have. And so, yeah. People see it and they're like, "What's that?" I'm like, "That's an MP3 player." I'm like, "What is this? Like 2002?" So yeah, that's me being an iconoclast. So the other question we had from 2009 was, this is a good used car question now. 2010 Malibu LTZ versus the 2010 Ford Fusion SEL. Which is better? And also, hey, sync looks really good. Hope it works.
Well, let's see, 2009, that would have been prior to my Ford Touch. So that was just the original version of Sync. So it actually wasn't bad. It was okay. Fusion. So first gen Fusion versus 2010 Malibu LT.
The 2010 Malibu that's the one where they actually restyled the long wheelbase of the funky looking one, right? Yeah. I like that. So I like that Malibu, but I don't think that's aged as well as the Fusion has. Maybe it has.
No, it's still a good looking car.
Is it like in terms of reliability and durability? How is it? Or I guess it's not.
I'm not aware of any issues with it aside from the ignition switch.
Is that Epsilon?
Yes. Yeah, it was Epsilon too. Or no, actually it was first generation.
That car's got all the bugs worked out of it. Pick either one of those. Those are both good cars.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you find a good price on one, in good condition, you probably won't, you probably get one pretty cheap for either case.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Fusion SEL, or just like the Fusion of that generation, is probably a little bit sportier feeling because of the Mazda in it.
Yeah, the LTZ, that would have been a 3.6 liter V6, so probably
more powerful. Yeah.
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 But either one's probably a good choice for a nice used midsize sedan.
I'm gonna say the Fusion. Pick the Fusion.
Okay.
Because I like, why not? Okay.
Yeah.
So from our Twitter questions, we had an interesting one sort of discussing, we talk about EVs, but we don't necessarily consider them from the point of apartment renters. And that's still something to overcome. Have you heard or do you know sort of like what the prevailing wisdom is about how that's going to work? I mean, there's a lot of people, cities are getting more dense, and that's where a lot of the wealth is becoming concentrated too. So like the buying power, and EVs are really great for cities, but if you rent in a city, you may not be able to charge an EV.
Yeah, I mean that's the fundamental dichotomy with electric vehicles. The place where they make the most sense, is in the city. Where that's where you get the most congestion and you have the most air quality problems, and where an EV can make a significant benefit in terms of pollution. But it's also the place where it's actually in a lot of ways the least practical to own one. But by the same token, it's also the place where it's least practical to own any vehicle. Right. Because a lot of people in dense urban environments tend to live in apartments, and so owning a car is problematic, and owning an EV even more so, because you typically don't have a garage. Even if in a lot of cities, even if you have a house, a lot of times it won't have a garage. You're going to be relying on street parking. So, if you live in an apartment, basically it comes down to the owners and management of the apartment. If it's a building that's got, its own parking facilities, you might be able to convince the building management to either install some EV chargers, or to allow you to install one, to have one installed, at your own expense. But basically, it's going to come down to a case by case basis. If you have, if you live in a building that has parking, and if you live in New York, for example, chances are you probably don't. You're probably relying on street parking, in which case, owning an EV is often going to be a non-starter, unless you happen to, be driving it to a workplace that has, charging at work, in which case you might be able to get by using that. But it's a real problem, and that's, again, that's kind of one of the reasons behind the movement towards mobility services, where the vehicles are part of fleets, and they can be charged, parked and charged remotely somewhere, and you don't have to deal with that problem.
Yeah, well, there's that whole thing about turning like everything about life into a service, which just grates on me. But yeah, I mean, it's alas. I think that if you're in a city and you're affluent, you like, because luxury apartments are, very much a huge thing. To the point where we have to actually have some laws in place. It's like, no, you can't make them all luxury units. You need to make the city affordable for the people that actually do serve you your coffee and do provide you the services that you pay for with your smartphone on demand. It's going to be very easy for the premium folks to afford that like parking spot with a extra fee for the charger rental, or the garage floor with the charger, like those things. The premium folks are not going to have an issue, and that's really that's where that stuff's going to deploy first, unfortunately. If you are sort of less well off, you got a lot longer road to travel. It's prohibitively expensive to buy an EV to a large degree, like a new one. They're all premium cars, unless you get something like a Leaf or a Bolt. But then you've got the problem of like where do you charge it, and I think that's difficult to overcome at this point. And so until we commit to that in some way, and there are companies working on like charge points trying to really get proliferation of their infrastructure out there. But until that commitment is made, I mean, once you get the little people on your technology, it's gonna grow. If it's just the wealthy, like I don't know, it's still kind of just like a plaything to a large degree.
Yeah, I mean, there are, for example, in some cities there are apartment buildings that are working with, for example, car sharing companies like Maven, for example. One of the services that Maven offers, that's GM's car sharing service. They have a couple of different programs. They've got their original conventional car sharing service that anybody can join and have short-term rentals of cars. They also have a program called Maven Home, where they work with building management companies that have parking facilities, and they will supply a fleet of vehicles for that building, including EVs, and they'll put in the EV charging equipment and everything, and then it's set up to be one of the perks of living in a building. Like you might live in a building that has a swimming pool or has fitness facilities. One of the things that some buildings are starting to do is provide car sharing fleets that are specifically for the residents of that building, so that anybody living in that building can reserve a car, take it to do their various trips to wherever and bring it back and park it. And so that's one way to get into an EV, is if you live in a building.
Right. A communist block.
Well, I mean, they're targeting, buildings at, various price points, not just affluent buildings, right. So that, in a way that makes, access to vehicles more affordable, because for example in New York, if you live in Manhattan, and you want to own a vehicle, you're basically looking at about at least $800 to $1,000 a month just to park a car in Manhattan. Yeah. To get a parking space in a car.
Yeah, but see, Manhattan is it's a special case. Manhattan is supported by much better public transportation infrastructure than many mid-sized cities. Like you look, what does Omaha have, for example? It's still a city. What kind of, or even like we saw with Hurricane Harvey, Houston is very car centric. There's still public transportation and public infrastructure there, but like you got to have a car in that city. So solving those, I think, is a key. Like Manhattan is Manhattan. Like that's fine. And it's ridiculous to have a car there, and I'm not spending $1,000 to park a car. Forget it. That's crazy.
Yeah, and I
think I just killed the conversation. My coffee kicked in. I'm ready to argue, Sam. All right. So hit us up at Wheelbearings Cast on Twitter. You can find us on Facebook. I am at Boston_auto. You are?
And I'm at Sam Abu Sam.
All right. And we are at wheelbearings.media otherwise. And we will be back in a week.
All right. See you next time.